So Foresight is a social first prediction market, and we're very focused within the Asia section. So if we look at a lot of other prediction markets, a lot of them are very focused on the US or Europe or more towards the Western side. But Asia still remains largely untapped. So what we're doing is basically we're trying to surface more information to users, so people can treat prediction markets as a place to discover new information, and our key focus areas within Asia.
Gotcha. Yeah. Prediction market has definitely been very big in the past year. How's the journey been so far the past year? How has the Asian market been for prediction?
Yeah, so it's definitely a lot of growth. We've seen like a huge amount of users coming in, and in terms of volume, we're like more than 5 or even 10x the volumes from the 2024 elections from the US. And yeah, like in terms of the entire like platform growth, like we've been getting a lot more users as well, a lot of volume, and within Asia, we're seeing a lot of users from like smaller Asia regions and also Southeast Asia using our platform.
Gotcha. So mostly South, because you guys are based in Malaysia, I guess Southeast Asia region. Cool. And I can imagine there's a lot of traffic, right? And that when people are placing bets, the latency or the infrastructure is important. I know, like, before we after talking about Subgraph and all that, I'm curious, like, what are your current or in the past, what was your like architect like when it comes to like indexing or fetching data or setting up the backend?
Yeah. So like when we first wanted to set up our prediction market, we launched on Katana. And so Katana is a fairly new chain. And we knew that we needed indexes, but there wasn't any available at that time. So when you guys came in, we definitely had a lot of our work sorted out because we were actually doing manual indexing, either through tracking each one of these transactions on chain and then storing it into our database, which obviously would cause some of these transactions to be missed. So I think like prior to integrating Ormi, almost every day or like every 2 days, we would actually have users saying that there were some transactions missing. And so like after integrating Ormi, everything was like pretty smooth because we could immediately just pull off the transactions and store them in and basically just sync with the state on chain.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, this is, people who think blockchain data is public, right? It must be free or easy, but it's actually not. So tell me more about the in-house. So I guess it's your own RPC and you're fetching your own database, and then there's a validation process. Yeah. Is that still running or you can prove?
Which part is running? Sorry.
Because I was just wondering, like, before you started relying on subgraphs, for the powering Foresight, like, you had some in-house components, right? For indexing. Is it still running or, yeah?
I think currently, like, are we still using any transaction?
Yeah, so we do still use somewhat of an event watcher, Victor, on our panel that listens for the events from on-chain and sends the data back to the backend. So the indexer right now is almost like a redundancy system. It's like a fallback that we use on top of our listener.
Gotcha. Yeah. And then, so the prediction market is only on Katana, right? Because I think you also are on Pulse chain or any other chains. Okay, gotcha. I see. With the newer blockchains, right? And people like to say, "Oh, we're so fast," but with that, there's also challenge. Like, how are you finding? I mean, it's both a blessing and a curse, right? Fast chain. Like, how are you finding, just in general, other aspect of infrastructure for building on Katana?
Yeah, I would say overall everything has been pretty smooth. A lot of our infrastructure is actually able to keep up with the transaction speed on Katana and also like able to scale accordingly. But we're soon moving over to a CLOP system, totally a central limit order book. And I think that will be pretty interesting to see how that system works on Katana.
Makes sense. And then maybe just to give me a sense, like before, I guess you tried out or you tried out our solution, how much time were you or resources were you spending on like the engineering side to get your own house indexing in place versus after that? Yeah, I'm curious about the journey.
Mm-hmm. Probably Aman can share a little bit.
Yeah, so beforehand, the setup definitely took a bit of time because we were not used to manually indexing and listening for events. And then once we discovered Ormi, the setup process honestly was quite smooth. Definitely the UI on the Ormi dashboard, the step-by-step is super useful, and, especially coming from the graph, which also has a step-by-step, seeing something similar, it makes it easier to follow. The part that required more time from our side is because we wanted to do everything from scratch. The manifest, the mappings, the subgraphs, instead of using a template or anything. That took the most time. But after creating the schema for the GraphQL and running some tests, the actual Ormi deployment side did not take long at all.
Gotcha. Sounds good. And then I guess a lot of the contracts are, like...
Yeah, they're all in-house developed. Yeah.
Makes sense. And I guess before you were like evaluating us and other providers, what were some top 2 or 3 requirements?
Okay.
Like before you pick indexing provider, what are some of the requirements like must have, or when you're evaluating?
On like indexing alone or like infrastructure in general?
Well, I guess I was more thinking like before you were doing the in-house, right? And then you're thinking, okay, I'll let Subgraph or hosted Subgraph do the job. So I guess when we were deciding evaluating a Subgraph provider or index provider, what were some of the requirements?
Yeah, I would say speed, like how quick can it sync state from chain, and also like how frequent can we call it. So for example, like how many requests per second can we make to the API? Reason is because like obviously we need the data as soon as possible. And with Katana, transactions are happening technically every second. So yeah, we need a system that can please scale with that as well.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. I just want to add one more thing. I think availability was also very important to us. So no downtime, and it's reliable. And so far it has been. So that's also really important because any downtime could lead to like data loss, temporary data loss. But users' experience would still be not as good if that happens.
If they're placing a bet, I guess that order doesn't refresh. They use the
and then panic blaming. Yeah.
So, but how many transactions are you roughly seeing for, I guess, your request?
I think from user, it's roughly every few minutes, I would say, maybe even higher, because our volume is not that large. But when it does happen, it needs to be reliable.
Sure. Okay. Perfect. Yeah. No, that sounds awesome. And then I guess what's next on your roadmap? Like how can we fit more into your roadmap?
Yeah, so there's a few things that we're rolling out in Q1 of this year. Firstly, is multi-chain. We're actually going to be deploying on other chains as well. So for example, on Base, on BNB. And so like ideally, if Ormi is supporting these chains, it will be way easier for us to integrate. But the second one is like what I mentioned before, the order book. So with the order book, obviously like we have new contracts that we're pushing out. There's going to be a lot more transactions that's going to be happening. And in terms of like indexing, there's probably going to be a lot more complexity in that as well compared to like our current infrastructure, which is an AMM. So yeah, I think like these are the key things that we will be working on in this Q1.
And then like including the contract as well, the subgraph mapping for that. And I'm also just curious because this is going to be more technical. So because like we work with many clients, right? Like I'll list like maybe 3 things that we tend to see like people have problem with. One is sync speed, right? When on a bigger chain like Base, there's sync speed issue. The other is data accuracy, as you mentioned, because sometimes even the top RPC provider Alchemy may have one indice off, like once a month, something happens, so that kind of gets really tricky. And number 3 is sometimes a heavy subgraph has trouble keeping up to sync to the tip of the chain. Some of that is infrastructure issues like the provider issue. Some of that is actually an education problem. By that I mean is like, hey, there are certain standards such as do not use ETH call, but many times developers are not familiar with that. Like obviously like my team is here if you have questions, or we try to look at the call handler. If there's anything inefficient, we'll let you know. But this is more like a general question. Like, how do you find just in general, like developing a subgraph? How easy is it? Like, is it like, I know you guys are familiar with like smart contract, but like how easy is it to create a subgraph once you have the contract?
I think in my opinion, it's quite easy. A lot of the steps are not too complicated. Just follow. If we want to create a new mapping for a new entity, we just follow existing shapes. So gotcha. It's quite repetitive in our case because we are mostly only handling user transactions and user reward. I can't say to how difficult it can be once you start integrating different types of entities that you want to keep track of. But in our case, I think it's quite simple. And just to add on, I think the only issue that we might have in terms of this is for Ormi, we noticed that every time we want to update the subgraph, it seems that you have to start syncing from the start again. even though we're only maybe creating a new entity with a more recent start block.
Let me pass this to my team. I mean, this is very important. Let me
Yeah.
see what they say, because, theoretically, right, if it's similar, the cache should be filled, things should be start from the beginning, but quick. There's also graph team, but it's more for like hot fix. I'll pass this to my team so to see what they, because, we do run something on top of the graph node. There are certain things we, kind of bridge the gap, or, make the experience better than just, graph node. What else was going to say? Yeah, what about debugging side? Because, one complaint I guess people think is debugging is difficult, right? How do you guys have approached the debugging or the integration process?
I think what was really helpful was the integration with the GraphQL Explorer. We haven't run into any bugs from the indexer side, but before we actually start integrating, we do test some queries through the Explorer with different conditions, with different sizes, date ranges, and if all of those seem to return accurate data, then we just proceed.
Yeah, against the block export, right?
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
Gotcha. Cool, awesome. Okay, but like, do you guys like run a local graph node copy to like say validate compile before things work, before you push?
Okay. Yeah, we just test.
Cool. One last thing I'm curious is, because more and more I've seen people say, "Oh, I use AI to optimize my subgraph or to write the subgraph for me." Like, do you guys use like AI or anything like that on the subgraph side?
Yes, we do, but just for minor stuff. Again, our shapes are quite simple, so
Okay, gotcha.
it doesn't require a lot of optimization.
Yeah, because we had a case where the guy was like, "Oh yeah, pretty much use it to optimize." It was better than before, but still, there were things that were slow and throwing error. And my team took a look and was like, "Hey, just do this one thing." So because we're thinking like, "Hey, AI has limited knowledge of it, right? We want to basically like train the AI to publicly
Yeah, definitely.
creating some graph." But I think eventually we'll get there. Awesome. I mean, those are kind of some of the